So this is just a quick overview of the npartiTools script. Kind of just packaged a bunch of stuff together and then put a couple of different tools together. But just wanted to go over some of it. So anyways, it's available here. I'll put a link below. And you can basically just grab this, chuck it in your script editor, or down here in the shelf, and use it as a kind of a button to load up the UI. So here it is. If we just run this, you'll see that it pops up. It'd be the same as if you just clicked it down here. This scene is pretty simple. I'll include it in the GitHub doc section, but basically it's just two particles with some dynamics on it, very basic. And maybe this one is turned off. It's turned off. Okay. So anyways, there you go. A couple particles, a couple emitters. So we'll just grab this first one. You can grab multiple if you want, add them in, but for this, just use one. These are pretty self-explanatory. There's far more nCloth features that you can use and edit. This script just sets up a few, doesn't do all that much, but just kind of get something working to a usable level, and then you're kind of off to the races to set up the individual characteristics that you want for anything bubbles. Also to note, this isn't a physically accurate bubble. This is just me kind of having some fun with an old project that we had that was going to be some bubbles popping out of beakers in kind of a cartoony world, so it wasn't ever meant to be anything physically accurate. So anyways, that being said, you've got scale down here for your min and max size of your bubbles that you kind of want, and then you essentially just hit make bubbles. And in this particular case, the bubbles will be popping. And you can see here that they come up and begin to pop here shortly. It's not a very long sequence. One of the things to keep in mind with this script is that the animation for all of these is set to something within the bounds of, they stop their lifespan around 130, maybe 100, so that they have enough time in their lifespan to die off. And when they die off, that's essentially when their visibility goes away. And when their visibility goes away, they pop about 10 frames prior to that. The popping sequence begins. So those are more things I might bring up to the surface of the UI, but for now it's just sort of a need to know, which is all stuff that you can change as well. And so if you look in here, you can see the individual groups. So this is that bubble, number 4. You can see the constraint system that's on it. That's now kind of exploded. You can see, so this is the locator, and the locator is holding onto our bubble, and then the bubble follows this path. So that's the path that the particle took originally, and so all that information is kind of there. And then you have your nCloth is here as well. And I'll bring this over so you can see, but there is some some keyframes on the dynamics to sort of get things initiated so they don't bump into each other and whatnot. But for the most part, you can see a few more down here, and then there's some pressure animation that's going on to kind of give it a more lifelike pop. But that's about it for that. So we can delete that one, and we can move on to the tube script. So just execute this a little bit and close that down. So tube extrusion, very similar UI, went with a theme here. Once again, you add the particle system to it, and we'll just use the default. So we'll have tube extrusion on the back. We'll animate the visibility. There's some thickness, which are radius. There's some other stuff that we'll talk about here in a second. So we'll just run it. I just noticed that the particle's life was not, or the particle was not enabled. Try that one more time. Okay, so all of that's gone through. Because this isn't running on nCloth, you can scrub this and see it. So to kind of look past, and don't worry about that, that's just because the particles are still enabled. The thing you can see here is that the grouping down here, let's just pick one of these for example, and look at there's a lattice that follows it. and you can see it bends and twists along the way. And that's its path along the curve. You can see the curve again here, and if we scrub back and forth, you'll see that that tube actually follows that curve quite closely. And that's kind of it that's in the tube extrusions. Back here is a global control if you wanted to move the whole system around and then set it up somewhere else if it wasn't quite in the right spot. At the moment, it does produce everything at the origin, so keep that in mind. It's one of the things I've planned on editing here shortly. Could actually come down here. I think this one's at the origin. We could do something different. Let's change, rather than it being a circle to a square, we'll change just a little bit bigger, and we'll turn off we'll turn off the extrusion part, so we just get a tube, but it'll still animate its visibility. So that's all finished. And so what we see is a bunch of squares now. Let's flip it this way. It looks, I guess, like a plant. And so all of them extrude, and then the visibility goes off. So if we just turn the visibility so it was not animating, delete that one. Just because they live on the same space, it'll look kind of strange. All right. So then this one is just them growing. Then you could do something else where, like, maybe 0.5, and we turn these back on, and maybe that's enough. So you can kind of build some interesting effects with it. So you've got the big and the small. And then, once again, you can grab the main controller, and then if you needed to move that somewhere else, you set up a whole bunch of these, you can do that as well. And then finally, if all you wanted to do was build curves out of this, I think we could just do it down here. And then you just get the curve. So there's no animation in this. So for whatever reason, if you needed to get something more complex in this, you could definitely make your particles do whatever. But that sort of brings in the third tool here. Let's delete these two. And that is the curve extrusion. Delete this one out. And this becomes kind of interesting. This is a part of a different project where I needed to do some mesh that was like very art directed, controlled. Basically turn these from hairs into, or from curves into hairs, or fibers, I should say. So let's say you just wanted to add those two for now. You have the ability to build this with as many segments as you want. So 200 for this length is probably pretty good. And I might come back in a second because this does take a little bit of time, but we'll see. Actually, this is going kind of quick. Okay, so we have curve 1 and curve 2. These are the children of them. And over here, what you can't see is the adds an attribute onto the curve called drive. And then you have the ability to come in and extrude those. So you could, if you just wanted to control the one, and have different animations on, oops, that's the wrong thing. Have different animations on them, you could. So that's pretty much the sum up of all the tools here. Mostly it was just bringing them all into one area so they were easier to use as a whole. So let me know if you have any questions. Hope that helps.